Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 215 today of Level Up. 60 minutes, of course, of live Q&A, where your questions really do drive the show. If you're watching over on YouTube, well, you can find out much more about the work that APMG International does in our channel. So do please give this video a like and, of course, subscribe to find out much more about us. Ella today is leading in the social chat if you're joining us live, both on LinkedIn and on YouTube. So do introduce yourself, please, and let her know your name and, of course, the city from where you're joining. She's going to post some links in so that you can vote up the questions that you would most like answered. And of course, for you to be able to add your own as well. Really, really important thing to do. If your question is selected, then your name's going to appear in the credits at the end of the show, and quite right too. So do get those questions in early and stay with us to see all of that happening. Now, regardless of whatever you decide the end goals of your project should be, your stakeholders will form their own opinions on its ultimate outcome and, of course, how you arrived at it. Stakeholders and their communities have very high expectations for project teams. So how do we set about creating and sustaining meaningful engagement with them? And in particular, what techniques are available to us in 2024? Helping us explore this topic today and figure things out are an esteemed panel of experts. So let's jump straight in and meet them all. Beginning with Sheila Roberts. Welcome back to Level Up, Sheila. She's the Chief Progress Officer over at Resilience Professionals and the co-author of a popular business resilience guide. A highly experienced project professional, Sheila is passionate about building and sustaining meaningful engagement. Welcome back to Level Up, Sheila. Great to see you.
Good morning. Thank you, Nick. And great to start the year with a really super topic of huge importance. So looking forward to the questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sheila. Ian Cribbs joins Level Up today for the first time. He's a director over at IMC&T Limited, a consultancy organisation who work across industries, including things like aerospace and defence and so on. He's a founding member of the Stakeholder Engagement Focus Group, and he's at the heart of building the professional community. Welcome to Level Up, Ian. Lovely to see you.
Thank you, Nick. It's Ian from Bicester in the UK. Yeah, I've been involved in stakeholder engagement for many years now. The key area of mine was working in the Middle East and dealing with the stakeholders there, which was a challenge to say the least. Thank you for welcoming me into APMG. I'm looking forward to today's session. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian. It's always a challenge for us to reach inside ourselves and differentiate our approach for different business communities and cultures around the world. So thank you. Josyph Hernandez joins. He's the Managing Director of Project Performance People. His career spans both public and the private sectors, working with the Australian federal government and leading global organisations, engaging people to deliver the very best possible outcomes from projects and programmes that he works with. Welcome back to Level Up, Josyph. Great to have you today.
It's great to be here, Nigel. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you very much indeed. Mads Lomholt joins. He's the partner and management consultant over at Implement Consulting Group, where he has a heavy focus on leadership engagement in projects. Leading transformational change is both complex, of course, and rewarding in equal measure. Mads, it's a pleasure to welcome you back to the panel today.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for having me here again. I'm thrilled to discuss this quite important, but also very difficult topic. At least that's what I think. And so, looking forward to today's session.
I agree. I think the conversational approach is the right one for this, because I'm sure this phrase is going to come up. It depends. When we're answering the different questions, context is everything, really, isn't it? In meaningful engagement, meaningful relationship building and management. Adrian Pyne rejoins the panel today. He is the author of the Agile Beyond IT book, and leads his own consulting business, a regular contributor to the profession and also here on Level Up. He's a fellow of the Association of Project Management and lead author of the Program Management section in the APM Body of Knowledge version 7. So welcome back to Level Up, Adrian.
Thank you very much indeed. Fantastic to be on this talented and actually pretty diverse and geographically as well team. I was reminded actually over the weekend that I wrote when I was in BT Engineering in 1992 a very early guide on project communications planning. So I'm not sure whether the discussion is going to be more Machiavelli or A.A. Milne. But let's see how we go.
Now there's two people from history that I haven't heard in the same sentence before. So it's a real original thinking. Thank you very much indeed, Adrian. Robert Rennie completes our panel of experts today. He's the managing director at PACE Programme and Projects, where he leads a team working across the whole project and programme lifecycle, from nuclear energy to complex supply chain management. Robert's career has an impressive blend of complex project management and also real-world operations as well, which I'm a great admirer of. Robert, welcome back to Level Up. Great to have you today.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me. I'm a newbie, so it's good to be here. So thanks very much.
Thank you indeed. So settle in, everybody. It's going to be a great session today. Also joining us, of course, Level Up can't work without our question master for the day. And today that's going to be Charlotte Miller, who joins us from the Thames Valley. Welcome, Charlotte. How was your weekend?
Thanks, Nick. Hi, everybody. Great weekend, although I did something for the first time this weekend, and that is I cleaned my own roof gutters this weekend. How exciting!
So there you go. We have risk, challenge. I'm not good with height, so I admire that. Very well done. Very well done with that. And given that we have had biblical amounts of rain in the UK for the start of 2024, probably actually a very, very sensible thing to do. All right, excellent. Well, on that note, I think we should jump into our questions for the day. So let's start off with our first question to the panel, please.
Thanks. We're going to have a busy session today, panel. Lots of questions coming in already. The first one is from Sally in High Wycombe in the UK. Who are stakeholders and what does engaging with them actually mean?
Well, it's a really good question, Sally. Let's kind of get a baseline in place from our panel. How would you best describe stakeholders? Adrian, why don't you start us off and then we'll hear from Sheila.
Okay. I think I can simply put it that a stakeholder is someone who's got a legitimate interest in a project, whether they're impacted by it, involved in it, influencing it in some way, having control over it in some way, but a legitimate interest, which also, of course, means that there are other people who pretend to be stakeholders who don't have a legitimate interest, but we may get onto that one later. And I see Mads nodding furiously there, so I shall shut up and let someone else have a go.
Okay. All right. Okay. So there's some folks who may be masquerading as such. Mads, we'll come to you in a moment, but before we get there, let's hear from Sheila.
Thank you. Yes, totally agree with who stakeholders are, but what does engaging with them mean? That's more than just provision of information. It's actually two-way and making sure that you understand their perspective as well as trying to influence for the benefit of the project. They will influence the project and may actually change it as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So it's definitely a two-way dialogue, a two-way conversation. Mads, your thoughts on this?
And of course, now I'm not a native English speaker, but a stakeholder is somebody who has something at stake in the changes that we are doing, of course. And yes, I was nodding very heavily just before, Adrian. Thank you for noticing that. And it's because I've had so many experiences where I failed to engage with important stakeholders and then they don't help you. Then they ruin your project or not help you with the project. So important to do that. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, thank you, panel. What a great question, Sally, to kind of start us off. I want to pop over to social if we can, and let's have a look at who is joining online. It's fairly active already online, so we'll do some shout outs. Atul joins from Kigali over in Rwanda. Great to have you as part of our online producer team today, Atul. Don't forget, put your question into the chat so that we can get it into the panel. And Gwen joins us from Surrey here in the UK. Welcome, Gwen, early on a Monday morning for you. So we appreciate you joining there. And Carrick actually joins from the heart of the United Kingdom, Staffordshire, here in the UK as well. So welcome to you, my friend. Looking forward to seeing your contribution come through. And Taiwo as well is joining from Birmingham in the UK. So the Midlands are very well represented today. Boleslaw, a regular contributor, of course, and active member of the Level Up community, is joining from a snowy Poland today. Appreciate that you weren't with us on Friday, but we did our best to answer your question for you, Boleslaw, that you had submitted a week ago. So thank you very much indeed, everybody. Let's move on. We'll take our next question to the panel, please, Charlotte.
Thanks, Nick. We've got our first live question. Our question from Atul asks, what kind of monitoring evaluation tools are required to manage stakeholders within developing projects in rural communities?
Well, there's some real context here, isn't there? Because rural communities, of course, don't always have the same level of communication infrastructure in different countries than they might have for those folks who are living in cities and towns. And it's a really important part of our work, particularly if we're working in healthcare, if we're working in public sector provision, in services and so on, or infrastructure, to be able to engage appropriately. So monitoring and evaluation tools, panel, how do you check that your conversation is indeed a dialogue, that it is two-way and it's having meaning and it is meaningful for your stakeholders? Sheila, your thoughts?
I think, Nick, I'm going to be the first to say it depends, as you suggested. But it does, because if you have a rural community with quite good communication methods, it's very different than a rural community without connection. In rural communities, as you mentioned, with healthcare and so on, vaccination programs, where you've not got people who are connected through the internet, you need to be out there face to face, actually talking to them. But where you've got good remote communications, you can do things like this with Zoom, you can do surveys, you can do questionnaires, you can do email contact. There's lots of things you can do if you have extra communication mechanisms. But if you don't have those things, you're going to have to get out there and go and see people.
Absolutely. And those physical techniques of, holding meetings, roundtables, these kinds of things, the classic town hall style of meeting, as borrowed from the US. These sorts of engagements are very, very important. And then you can start to think empirically about how do you monitor and evaluate the feedback that you are gathering in and the dialogue that you're gathering. Adrian, your thoughts on monitoring and evaluating stakeholder management?
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, I had to think quite long and hard about this one. And first thing, I'm just going to support everything that Sheila just said. But my mind went back to some years ago when I actually did some work with the South African government's Department of Rural Affairs and Land Reform, helping them to improve how they did their sort of development projects out in rural communities. And one of the big challenges we had was actually making sure that the communities had a proper voice. It was quite easy to engage with various leaders and particularly political leaders in the communities, but they didn't always represent all the voices in the communities. And we raised this as an issue and got, I have to say, rather big amount of pushback, and we had to do quite a lot of work to actually, win support to say, these are the mechanisms you need to put in place so that the whole of communities get a voice and not just one political party. And that's not just something that happens in South Africa. I live in a rural county, and again, I'm aware of local development projects where not the entire community gets a voice very easily, and you have to go and seek out people who are legitimate stakeholder groups and find ways to help them engage.
Thank you very much indeed. Robert, your thoughts, please. Then we'll go to Josyph.
Yeah, I agree with everything that people have been saying. It's important when you're isolated or in as it's put, a rural community, that you've got the communication tools. Communication's key. It's everything, obviously. So, anything from a mobile phone right through to being able to get online is quite important to make sure that the stakeholders are engaged and part of the project going forward.
It's fascinating, isn't it? It's one of those things that often on projects we imagine that we've communicated successfully because we've sent something. But I think until you actually get it back again, until you hear back, you may as well be just whistling in the wind. So you're absolutely right. Whatever mechanisms you need to deploy, and they will vary depending on your situation, then it's very important to be able to monitor and see, well, did we hear anything back? Was it just, tumbleweed that we got? Was there any reaction at all to this? And how could we measure that? Even the absence of something can be measured. Josyph, final thoughts on this one, please.
Thank you, Nigel. My original thought on this question reminded me of one of my first bosses when I first started working in project management, and he was trying to teach me inclusiveness and what it meant in federal government jargon, especially if you were going to deliver for that sort of organization. One of the first steps to making your stakeholder engagement plan more inclusive is ensuring that you include everyone who needs to be included. And it's redundant, but it's actually true. If you work with people who are in remote areas and people who are in multiple locations, and the means of communication is through different technologies, you always need to remember there's nothing that replaces face-to-face interaction. The amount of information that you get by just standing in front of another person, it's almost like going on a first date. You don't know them. You want to know a little bit more about them. They want to know more about you. Are we going to get along together? Are we actually going to create a space that in collaboration we will deliver some things? Or do you want this to succeed? Those sort of things get sorted out very quickly in person. It's when you do not have a personal interaction where things start getting more tricky as you use tools in order to make up for the space created by the distance of your stakeholders. And there's different ways of doing that. But principally, I've had so many mistakes engaging with stakeholders that I can tell you there's always more to it than what we can share in a simple conversation in about an hour.
Thank you very much. That's okay. And there will be as well. I'm sure that we can drill down a little bit further. So thank you very much, Josyph. And thank you very much for the question as well, Atul, because, this is the kind of thing that we need to consider. How do we monitor and evaluate what is actually going on? What does good look like? And there's lots of guidance out there to be able to use as a starting benchmark. And also, get that dynamic feedback, I would say, from community. And the one thing that to remember is that you don't need to be in the rural community to be isolated. You don't need to be in a rural community to be disenfranchised. And it's up to us as project professionals to consider that inclusivity agenda and make sure that we're reaching out to all of the elements of a community that are important to be able to engage with. So thank you very much, panel. Great question. Let's move on, Charlotte. We'll take our next question, please.
Our next question from Adrian. Do we engage with stakeholders or manage them?
And it's even in uppercase. Thank you very much indeed, because I think this is at the heart of figuring this out. Matt, why don't you start us off and then we'll go to Ian.
Thank you, and thank you for that question. It is such a great question, and to me, that's a key thing when working with stakeholders. That's, for me, engaging is a lot more than just managing. When I think about the term manage, is you do something and you expect people to react and act accordingly. When you engage, you are, putting yourself into the middle of the, whole stakeholder management, teams, people, and try to have conversations. You try to lead them. You try to influence. You try to get them on board and be really engaged and motivated. So I think engaging, you do a lot more, but you also get a lot more, getting a lot more relations for that matter. So managing, for me, is not enough.
Thank you very much indeed. Ian, your thoughts, then we'll go to Sheila.
Yeah, thanks. And I agree with everything that Matt is saying there. One of the things that we have done through the Stakeholder Engagement Focus Group is looking at what is the differential between engaging with your stakeholder and managing your stakeholder. And I always use the thing is that you can't manage the stakeholder, but you might be able to manage their expectations. But you can only do that by engaging with them. And engaging, going back to an earlier question, is a two-way dialogue. You have to talk to them, you have to listen to them as much as that. You've got to get into their shoes, find out what their issues are, what their fears, their concerns, what their aspirations are for the outcome of the change or the project.
Thank you very much indeed. I like that. And I think we'll put that question also, this question rather, to the audience in real time so that we can get their feedback in a couple of minutes or so. So if you're in the audience, what would you say about the difference between engaging and managing stakeholders, and where would you place that emphasis? Do you agree or disagree with the panel? That would be fantastic to see. So please jump in, let us know your thoughts online. Sheila, your thoughts, please, and then we'll go to Adrian, who put the question.
Thank you. I see in trying to manage stakeholders, people tend to try to direct them and make them work the way they want the stakeholders to work. When you're engaging with them, you're allowing the stakeholders to shape what's going on, as well as having information, getting the feedback, fine detail maybe, but they actually contribute to how things are done and sometimes why things are done as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's quite interesting that, isn't it? That extra degree of freedom actually brings additional value that will help you, and you should see it as a positive thing rather than as something which needs to be almost bulldozed out of the way, if I can use that clumsy phrasing. Adrian, you put the question in the first place. Final thoughts from you?
I'm going to disagree with the rest of the panel. For me, it comes down to the perception of what people mean by engaging. And I've been lecturing in stakeholder management, business schools, and doing it practically a long time. I've had a pretty consistent feedback on how people perceive engagement, and anything from sort of a sort of ultra sort of woke reaction, as it were. Oh, engaging is just woke rubbish. To something, shall we say, more positive. But nonetheless, it's sort of more a touchy-feely thing. And the fact is, in my sort of experience and the perception, you always have to manage stakeholders. But how you manage them, hopefully, is through engagement techniques. And as a few people have said to me in the past, you can't engage with someone who's got a gun to your head. That's not how you deal with that situation. So that's, I put the context around that. You always do stakeholder management. I would love to think that that the best approaches will be to use various engagement techniques. That's kind of where I'm coming from on this one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is why I also talked about the Machiavellian thing. I often say when I'm lecturing people, stakeholder management is the most Machiavellian aspect of project management. And if people don't know what I mean, go and read a book called The Prince by Machiavelli.
Okay, all right. Well, that's another book recommendation. My New Year reading list actually is getting longer and longer as we talk. We've only had 3 episodes, and I think I've got a month's worth of study to be able to do already. Thank you very much. Ian, we'll come back to you, and then we'll go to Josyph for final comment.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and thank you, Adrian, for that insight. The way I look at it here is that if we try to manage stroke direct our stakeholders, the problem is that if they don't believe that they're being listened to, then they become negative, have a negative output, negative feeling to the project. I look at engagement as finding out what their expectations are. What do they see coming out of the project? What is their issues? What are their fears? What are their concerns? And by that, we can actually start to dispel some of those fears and those concerns and bring them back on site. Sheila said earlier on that they can influence and direct the project. And if we're not careful, we don't want them directing and influencing in a negative way. We want it in a positive way. And that will only come about through a meaningful engagement with them and managing their expectations.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Josyph, final thoughts?
My final thoughts on these are very personal as well as professional. Early in my career, I thought I could get away with charm, being likable, trying to mold myself to everyone I spoke to, just because I'm nice and I can make the ambience feel good for people. And we naturally connect with people in that way from an ego perspective, which is basically ourselves versus others. And in that same framework, you have connection with these individuals, and then you have to draw back significance. What am I here to do? And how am I going to structure this approach? So there's always going to be a dance, salsa dance, if you want to call it that. Latin American style, there's a little bit that you do, there's a little bit that the other people do, and you start having that dance. It's more difficult to dance with multiple people as you are with one single person. And you can craft the metaphor as you like, but I've had the best parties when the most stakeholders are involved, but they're also the most difficult to manage.
Well, there you are, you see, there's the full spectrum of techniques for stakeholder engagement in a nutshell. So I think we might even just clip that little answer out, Josyph, and we might use it in a short for people because it is fantastic, from salsa dancing through to parties, through to thinking about, managing those expectations from dancing with different partners in different ways. All right, excellent. And we put the same question to the audience, of course, our producers online. Gwen very kindly jumped in first with her thoughts on this. And she says that she thinks engagement is a form of establishing a communication plan. Managing their expectations is done from the preferred communication of the stakeholder's choice. So very good. Thank you very much indeed, Gwen. Other comments that we're getting, Caleb jumps in. It's a bit of both. Caleb, the voice of experience, absolutely right. It's always going to be a blend of different tools and techniques, isn't it, between management of expectations and engagement with people. So thank you, my friend, for your contribution. That's great. Looking elsewhere as well, we have Josyph, who's joined us from London. So thank you, Josyph, for joining in and being part of the production team today. Get your questions into the panel. And also, we have some folks in Switzerland joining. Now, if you're a LinkedIn user and you pop up like this with a little robot picture, it's to do with the settings on your profile in LinkedIn. So it's a security thing. So that's perfectly all right. To remain anonymous, not a problem at all. But it's great to have you as part of our audience. And Ayan joins us from Singapore. So great to have you online today. I'm sure it's a little warmer in Singapore than it is at the moment in a chilly Denmark and a chilly United Kingdom. So thank you for joining. Now, let's move on if we can. We have a lot of live questions panel. So we're going to pick up the pace and do our best to get through them. Charlotte, next question.
Thanks, Nick. Live question from Carrick Brown. Welcome back. How important is cultural humility for effective stakeholder engagement? And how do you develop this on a shoestring?
Well, budget, I've found, is no measure of whether or not you're able to differentiate your approach and make sure that you're approaching your work with a degree of humility. Confidence, of course, is needed, but you can still be humble as you're approaching complex problems, Carrick. So I would say, I'm not sure that budget is the driver here. Panel, what are your thoughts about making sure that cultural humility is at least a consideration, or respect for other cultures is a consideration in how you approach stakeholder engagement? Robert, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I think as you said there, the budget really aside, it's down to personal relationships and personal engagement with, as Josyph put quite well earlier, doing the dance is quite important. I don't think the budget really should come into play here. It's really down to the individual and the stakeholder and the relationship between the both of them.
Thank you very much indeed. Mads, your thoughts, then we'll go to Ian.
I think that's also a great question, and I think it boils down to stakeholder engagement is about people, it's about the individual, it's about the group. So knowing the individual, both from a cultural point of view, but also from a preference point of view. How do the others prefer you to have conversations, talk with them, engage them? I think that's key thing. And two things that I learned a lot about from in this topic was Erin Meyer, the culture map, understanding different cultures national-wise, but also another nice tool, Whole Brain, which is about individual preference styles. So acknowledging different people is important, I would say.
Thank you very much. Yeah, acknowledgement, respect, recognition, sticking to those core values gets you an awful long way into thinking through this kind of problem. Ian, your thoughts, and then we'll go to Sheila.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, great question. Having worked in the Middle East with the Middle East nationalities out there, understanding their culture and their perception of what good looks like and how they would like to see a change or a project mature is very, very important. And I always look at the engagement. It can be a two-pronged attack, if you like. One is the formal engagement with your stakeholders. The other is the informal. And when I'm talking to people about stakeholder engagement, I said there's nothing wrong with a coffee and a sticky bun to talk to one of your stakeholders to get the truth that's coming. You may not get in a formal meeting, but you're likely to get it over a coffee and a sticky bun. So adapt your style of engagement with your stakeholder to meet the requirements at the time and the people that you're talking to.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. And it's finding those opportunities, isn't it, to take time and invest in that relationship. Not everything is transactional, particularly if you're dealing with a complex set of issues as part of a project. To understand culture takes time. You're not going to be able to do it overnight. It's like drinking from a fire hose sometimes, I think. Sheila,
can I just come back to you on that one, Nick, before you hand over to Sheila? Sorry, Sheila. I found in the Middle East is that if you are not engaging with the senior stakeholders within a project on a regular basis, they take the perception that you're therefore hiding something from them. And then they go into a defensive mode or an attack mode because they don't want to be held accountable for the fact that something's going wrong with the project. The fact that nothing's going wrong with the project is immaterial. You haven't talked to them lately, the last week or the last 2 weeks, you haven't spoken to them. And it's a very dangerous road to walk down if you're not fully engaged with your stakeholder on a periodicity that they want. And you just have to make that time available.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. Sheila, final thoughts?
I agree what the other panelists have said. And culture, though, I think comes at a lot of different levels. There's the clear big stuff of different nationalities, different expectations, and so on. But also within our own organizations even. I recall doing a major culture change project within an NHS organisation and being sat on the night shift in the porter's lodge of a hospital, talking to them about what their views were, about what their expectations were, how the project would impact them. And it's not the same as sat as a senior manager. And understanding it from their perspective, I think, is really important. So putting yourself in someone else's shoes effectively.
Indeed. Thank you very much indeed, panel. What a fantastic question, Carrick, as well. And I would say humility is a really, really good idea. I think early in my career as a consultant, I imagined that I knew all of the answers and that was my job. After a little while, I quickly realized that being a consultant was not about knowing the answers. It was actually about asking better questions. Yeah. So there you go. It's something that comes, isn't it, with experience, I suppose. Thank you very much indeed, Sheila. Thank you, Carrick. Let's move on, Charlotte. Next question to the panel, please.
Thanks, Nick. We've got another live question from one of our returning viewers, Howie. Who should lead or own stakeholder engagement?
Well, this is a good question, isn't it? Because project teams now take different shapes and forms all of the time. So is there a specific individual on a project that you would say needs to own building that stakeholder engagement? What are your thoughts, panel? Where would the role classically fall? Adrian, let's come to you, if I may, and then we'll hear from Mads.
Well, I think classically it falls, if it's in a project, with the project manager, because it's part of the toolbox of that person has for leading the project. But then it comes down to sort of, if you like, the RACI model. There's responsibility and there's accountability. So the project manager may have accountability, but depending on the size and the scale of what you're doing, you may well have anything from a single person in the team who's got the responsibility of leading and carrying out stakeholder management to sometimes an entire team. If you look at large infrastructure projects, you will have entire teams of people responsible for carrying out stakeholder management. So it's important, I think, to differentiate between the accountability and the responsibility.
Yeah, and it's a really good model. And if you can't remember after all of the summer break, if you're in Australia right now and you're just back to work and you kind of need to look up the RACI model, it's well worth it. Do so, because it's a fantastic thing to have on a little post-it note somewhere or electronically on your desktop. Mads, your thoughts, then we'll go to Sheila.
Commenting on top of Adrian's actually, because there is a difference between, of course, owning it and leading it, and responsibility and accountability. So I always think about the project manager being, owning the facilitation of stakeholder management, ensuring that, yes, we are on top of it, that we have a plan for it, but then the project manager shouldn't do all the stakeholder engagement stuff, of course. That's a distributed task. So you need to assign people who are responsible for having conversations, asking questions, and engaging and doing all that stuff. But that's not only the project manager's task. He or she should facilitate and ensure that it's been done, of course.
Thank you very much indeed. Sheila, final thoughts on this?
I think that I agree with what the other two panelists have said, and essentially it also is a matter of multi-layers again. As Adrian said, major infrastructure projects, it's all very well consulting the planning committee, but what about the people who live alongside? They need to be engaged as well. So looking at it from different levels and who's going to lead at those different levels as well.
Thank you very much indeed. One final thought from myself as we transition into the next question is really to think about it from that distributed ownership perspective. As the panel have said, I think all of us working on projects have an element of ownership over stakeholder engagement, but clearly there needs to be some focus and leadership, from the project leadership team. Very good. Thank you very much, Howie. Great question, as ever, from you. We really appreciate your contribution. Next question, please, panel, as they are stacking up.
Thanks, Nick. We've got another live question from Vera. What can make our work with stakeholders successful?
So success, better outcomes, and so on. Mad, start us off, and then we'll hear from Josyph.
I mean, when they are happy and when they help the project, sort of, very clear, very basic core to that one, I would say. But for me, it's very much about building the trust and getting the reactions. Do I get the right reactions? Do they help the project moving forward to the impact that we are trying to realize? I think that's one of the core elements of measuring success. Do they help us? Do they not help us?
Yeah, it's that kind of emotional intelligence, isn't it? It's reading between the lines almost, getting to understand the nuance, if I can put it that way, of somebody's reaction or response or, contribution to a project. Josyph, your thoughts on this, please.
Thank you very much. My answer to that question of what can make our work with the stakeholders successful is twofold. The first one is learning how to build rapport with people. There's different techniques to do that, but in essence is active listening. Literally being in a state where you are absolutely receptive, and I'm not just meaning putting your ear towards them and see what words come out of their mouth. It means hearing with your whole body and mind, cleaning up your mind and seriously putting 100% of your attention on them. The second part is actually trying to understand their values. And that's a very cool word in project management. It comes from the coaching world, but in project management, a hierarchy of values that every individual human being has on what is important to them. That simple question of what is important to you in terms of the project, the deliverable, the outcome, the objectives, the vision, whatever it is that you're trying to set out to do, you need to figure out that very quick. And if you actually figure it out and remember, no matter what you do, whatever you're doing is important to them too.
Thank you very much indeed. Active listening and really, really approaching it with an open mind and not a preconceived concept. Thank you very much. Robert, final thoughts on this one?
Yeah, final thoughts. I think to understand the scope, delivery, and cost is obviously key, and make sure that the stakeholders understand this as well, and you're succinct between the both parties. Obviously, to measure the success, will be you need to obviously communication is key, but understanding what the objective is very, very important.
Yeah, I agree with that. And sometimes, being honest and open and saying, this is a great idea, but it's beyond the scope, of what it is that we're able to achieve in this project, can be an important part of that two-way dialogue, and building that. There's, it may well be a fabulous idea, but it may be beyond the project's capability or remit in order to be able to deliver that. So thank you, Robert. Excellent. Charlotte, time is working against us. We have to press on. So let's take our next question to the panel, please.
Thanks, Nick. We've got another live question from Isaac. Welcome, Isaac. What strategies or techniques would you ensure the stakeholders are appropriately engaged, and how did this contribute to the success of the projects?
All right. Okay. Well, ensuring, guaranteeing, underwriting, and all of those things are words which are often omitted in legal contracts. But in the social context, Adrian, what strategies or techniques have you found that work for you?
Well, strategically, the first thing to do is to go back and say, what's the purpose of stakeholder management / engagement? And its purpose is to help the project or program be successful. The purpose is actually not to make stakeholders happy. That may well be a goal with individual stakeholders, but that's not the purpose of stakeholder management. So that's the first thing, being clear about what it is we're using this technique and set of techniques for. In terms of sort of strategic approaches, I've used for donkey's years a very, very simple model, which there's no way I invented. It's the why, who, what, where, how model. So it's kind of why are we doing stakeholder management? So what are the goals for individual? Do we want to ease the path of the project? Do we want to gain approval for the budget, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So what are the goals? Who are the stakeholders and who aren't? What are their interests? So what are the key messages we need to be giving to them? And then it comes in when you know all of that analysis, that you can say, okay, so what's the best way to manage / engage with individual stakeholders and stakeholder groups? And then only finally to actually, okay, so how do we actually go and do that and produce your plan? So it's that structured approach, which also means that you can have, quotes, measures, because you can link everything back in an audit trail back to the goal of what do we want to achieve from specific stakeholder groups? And that gives you your trackability.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Adrian. Ian, and then Josyph.
Yeah, thank you. I agree everything Adrian has just said there, but one of the key things I think is how does the stakeholder wish you to communicate with them? Is it by a whole dialogue or 15 or 20 slides, or is it just a 10 or 1-page bullet point that you want to discuss with them? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? Is it quarterly? And if you don't get that right, then you won't get the engagement and you won't get the buy-in from the stakeholder. You've got to get that right first. So I always, when I'm working with stakeholders, I go to say to them, how would you like me to communicate with you? I can do it this way, or this way. What is your preference? How often would you like me to communicate with you on a formal basis? My door is always open. If you've got a question, give me a ring, drop me an email, come and see me, and we'll sort something out. And it's finding out how they wish to be engaged with that is key, I think, to making that back. And as Adrian said, you can then link that back to what is the purpose? The purpose is to make the project successful at the end of the day.
Thank you very much indeed. Josyph, your thoughts, and then we'll go to Sheila.
Thank you very much. One of the key strategies that has worked for me personally is to make judgment calls and analyze what situation you're in from different perspectives. I have been in situations where I have to remember what my role is. So if I'm the project manager of this project and I'm responsible for the delivery of the project, are the relationships with the stakeholders important in the spirit of delivery? Can I deliver a project and piss everyone off? Yes. Can I actually keep good relationship with the stakeholders and not deliver? There's consequences to that too. So those judgment calls happen in every single project, and they're different with every experience that you live in that corporate or organizational environment. So to contribute to the success of the project, simply deliver, do your job. That's always the number one priority as a project manager. The second one is see how many relationships we can actually salvage through the process of delivering and giving them the outcomes they ask you to deliver and that are important to them. And it's usually a Pareto rule, 80-20. On a normal situation, you cannot keep everyone happy no matter what you do. And sometimes it's more like a 90-10 against you. And I've seen multiple projects in which project managers don't survive. And there's a train wreck behind you. There's 26 people that have tried and failed. What makes you different? And come on, try and do it to us. So,
yeah, we should have an entire episode on this is the project I was invited to take on after N number of predecessors had been unable to deliver it. We'll do one of those. It'll be a cathartic experience, I think, for experienced PMs around the world. Sheila, sorry, very quickly now, final thoughts on this.
I'm going to keep it brief, Nick, but agree with what the other panelists have said. But in addition to those stakeholders where you can actually understand their preferences, one of the ways that I would make sure that I'm getting the engagement is to have an open mechanism that anyone and stakeholders who I may not have identified yet can actually communicate with the project. So whether that's a public website that they can put something into, or whether it's simply making your contact available, something so that other stakeholders can just give their input.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Excellent. Very good panel. Time is marching on. So Charlotte, if we may, let's go and take our next question, please.
Thanks, Nick. We've got a live question from Carrick Brown. Are we doing enough to consider the needs of neurodivergent stakeholders? And how do we identify best practice to understand how to improve communication?
There's quite a lot in here, Carrick, about managing to extend our own knowledge of neurodivergence first. So I think I would encourage colleagues to really think about your audiences and to think about different learning styles and the way in which different people prefer to process information and how much reinforcement is sometimes needed. You know, depending, we're all on a spectrum or neurodiversity. So all of us, you know, wherever we are, we're on that spectrum. So do consider that and consider those people who are not necessarily representative of your own preferred communication styles. Sheila, start us off and then we'll hear from Mads.
I think it's a great question, and everybody is different. So we need to consider everybody's needs. However, the more that each of us as individuals understands the spectrum of neurodivergence, the better we can engage with people. I think, though, the more that we actually ask people how they're going to prefer their communication, the better we're going to do. I know in my own family, we've got neurodivergence, and certain members of the family need a discussion followed up in writing because they won't actually interpret the discussion in the way that you recall it.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Sheila. Thank you for sharing that. Mads, final thoughts on this?
Yeah, very briefly also, I touched upon it before, this preference model, which is called whole brain, has helped me a lot, both to, not getting into conflicts because I understand the other people a lot more and acknowledge that they are definitely not the same as me. So listening to what they're saying, listening to what they are telling me, asking them, as Ian also was on about earlier, how would you prefer me to communicate, to collaborate with you, and acknowledge their ways of preferences? Whole brain has helped me definitely a lot.
Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate it. So the whole brain model, do research that. Have a little look for it. We'll try and find a link so that we can pop that into the chat for everybody. Thank you, panel. Charlotte, I think we've got time to squeeze one final question in.
Thanks, Nick. We've got a live question from Howie. What are the most effective methodologies to engage difficult stakeholders?
Now, this is quite interesting, isn't it? Because it presupposes difficulty. And in real life, of course, this is something that challenges us all of the time, isn't it? We perceive somebody or a group of people, as being difficult. It might just be that they have a different perspective, of course. Ian, your thoughts, please, and then we'll hear from Sheila.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Yes, difficult stakeholders, they are everywhere. And they pop out of the weeds whenever you least expect them. Going back to what Lars was just saying just now, is to actually listen to what their concerns are, as opposed to just merely hearing what their concerns are. Is to actually listen to them, give them the voice, have an understanding with them. So that if you don't know what their concerns are, how are you actually going to get them sorted out? So you have to understand that. And the best way of doing that is to sit them down, come back to the coffee and a sticky bun and just talk to them in an informal way. Come on, what's the problem? Tell me what your problem is. Let's see how we can resolve this problem. We both want the project to succeed. So let's work together to make that succeed.
Thank you very much indeed. Sheila, your thoughts, please, and then Mads.
I'm just going to be brief. I know we're running out of time, but I think that facilitation is actually a completely underrated skill of project management. And in fact, the APMG certification that looks at process iceberg for facilitation is well worth looking at to help you to engage with what might be termed to be difficult stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely right. Those facilitation techniques are legendary to be able to break through and improve people's genuine understanding and coherence. Mads, final thoughts on this?
Of course, and then I meet a lot of difficult stakeholders, of course, and they tend to be difficult because mainly they don't understand what the project is about, or they don't know enough of what the project is about. So sitting together with them, maybe with a sticky bun, I like that one, but having conversations with people and listening to what they are saying is key for me, at least.
Okay. The use of sweet treats here is quite strong amongst this group of professionals. So, and why not to? Although it will break apart my New Year's resolutions personally, if I'm always reaching for those. Howie, thank you so much indeed for fabulous question. And what a set of questions we've had today, panel. Just incredible, really, really incredible. Now, there is, of course, if you're watching online, a helping hand that you may reach out to and use to elevate your career. It is the APMG Stakeholder Engagement course and certification that you can take. And you too can transform your career with that, because it's one thing to be somebody through their experiential learning as building up your techniques and so on. It's quite another then to be able to take the leadership position with confidence on a project to say, yeah, actually, I really understand how to do this well. And I've studied it and I have the certification to demonstrate not just my aptitude to do something, but also that I can do it in real life. So there's a recommendation for you. So let's go around our panel and hear our closing remarks, if we can. Adrian, your closing remarks for today, please.
Stakeholder engagement, management, whatever you want to, however you want to label it, has been one of the revelations for me. The people aspects of our profession have been very late coming to us. When I started out, it was all about the mechanistic scheduling, planning, risk management and stuff, and people were nowhere. And it's one of the most important things that you can do within your project management toolbox. And so the diversity of skills, the diversity of techniques is a critical one to learn.
Thank you very much indeed. Robert, final thoughts, please, and then we'll hear from Josyph.
Yeah, I think just to understand the scope, the delivery and the cost and the time, and really get aligned with the stakeholders is quite important, and that's the way you can measure success or measure failure, if that's the case, and get the help you need. I think it's important to really get the help you need if a project's failing. The stakeholders are there to really give you a helping hand to get it back on track.
Thank you very much indeed. Josyph, and then Mads.
Thank you very much. My closing remarks are, no matter what you do, strive to, in order to minimize disagreement, ensure that you can get all of the stakeholders in the room first. If you don't have that, that's going to cause a lot of problems. And then ensure after that they will share in the gains or losses of whether this project gets done or not and what's in it for them. And then you'll see the equation very clearly after that.
Thank you very much indeed, Josyph. Mads, and then Sheila.
I just want to say thank you a lot for those great questions. I learned a lot today. Also that stakeholder management is not only about stakeholder satisfaction, but also about sticky buns and dancing.
I know. What a fabulous image that has brought to my attention as we dance across the room, salsa style, with a silver tray filled with goodies. Excellent. Thank you. Baked goods. What's there not to like? Sheila, and then Ian.
Yes, thank you for such brilliant questions. I think we could have gone on for hours with this, but unfortunately we've had to bring it to a close.
Thank you very much indeed. And Ian, and then Charlotte.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks for the rest of the panel. I found this very informative and challenging in a number of areas as well. So thank you for that. And I thank for the viewers sending in their questions. They've been excellent questions, and again, brings in a lot of thought process on that. Final closing is that projects can only happen with people. And going back to what Adrian has said, we need to engage with people.
Absolutely right. Thank you very much indeed. Well, Charlotte, it's been a fast and furious episode. This one in particular, sliding around corners at high speed and occasionally applying the handbrake, metaphorically speaking. Your reflections on today?
First and foremost, to echo Ian's comments, thank you to our viewers for the live questions. They've been superb. We've got some lovely comments in the social feed panel. If you want to have a look at them, thank you for those. Just a note to say that today in the UK is Blue Monday, and it can be any colour that you wish it to be so. So in my case, it's very much pink today. So it's Pink Monday today.
All right. Okay. Very good. Of course, referring to that moment where people consider anyway, that perhaps we've lost that warm, glowy feeling of the Christmas break, and we're back into work and so on. Now, thank you very much indeed, panel. On behalf of the producers online, we had a really strong audience today. Thank you to them for their contribution. To Ella and the social team, Shanice, they were both engaged actually today online as it was so busy. So thank you very much, Ella and Shanice, for doing your work. Over on our website, of course, folks, you may search for the answers to more than 2,100 previously asked questions. It's totally free, and it connects you with almost 300, we're almost at 300 now, expert panelists from around the world. Don't forget, you may listen to the audio versions of the shows on your preferred podcast platform. It's a brilliant way, actually, to reinforce your memory over today. If you enjoyed today, why not listen back to the podcast version later on in the week as you're enjoying a little walk outdoors and so on. Coming up later on this week on Friday, our first session on how to build digital leadership skills is taking place. That's at 2 p.m. In the afternoon UK time. And then next Monday, we're going to be opening our first discussion of the year on change management. That's Monday, the 22nd at 8 a.m. UK. Don't forget to head over to the YouTube channel. Give this video a like, if you would, please, and subscribe and share it now with your colleagues. They will get a lot of benefit, I'm quite sure, from the panelists. Just ask us and we will send you a personal summary of what's coming up and how you too can join us here on the panel and level up your career with APMG. Thanks very much, everybody. We'll see you next time.